She found survivors who had never spoken publicly. She gave them space to tell their stories on the record. On November 28, 2018, the Miami Herald published her investigation, Perversion of Justice. It named the architects of the deal. It traced the construction of the non-prosecution agreement step by deliberate step. It gave a generation of survivors the public platform that 2 decades of legal proceedings had denied them, and it triggered federal action from a direction no one in Epstein's circle had anticipated. The Southern District of New York, entirely separate from the Florida office that had made the deal, announced that they were not bound by Alex Acosta's non-prosecution agreement. The agreement covered the Southern District of Florida. It did not cover Manhattan. It did not cover their jurisdiction, and they had been watching. Among the survivors whose accounts had become central to the public record was Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre alleged that she was first approached by Ghislaine Maxwell in approximately 2000 when she was 16 years old and working at the spa of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach. She alleged she was subsequently trafficked by Epstein to powerful individuals across multiple countries. Among those she named was Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, a son of Queen Elizabeth II. Andrew has consistently and categorically denied all allegations of contact with Giuffre. In February 2022, he settled her civil lawsuit. British media reported the settlement figure at approximately $13.5 million. He admitted no wrongdoing. As a condition of the settlement, he agreed to a series of charitable and educational commitments supporting the rights of victims of trafficking. On July 6, 2019, Epstein's plane landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. He had been in France. Federal agents were waiting on the tarmac. He was arrested on charges of trafficking of minors and conspiracy to commit trafficking. Bail was denied. He was remanded to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, one of the most secure federal detention facilities in the country. For the first time in 14 years, the full machinery of public accountability was pointed directly at him. A real trial. Subpoenaed records entered into public evidence. Compelled testimony under oath from every person investigators chose to call. The complete financial architecture of his operation, his network, his enablers, every name connected to his island, his planes, his residences, potentially exposed under oath on the public record, with the world watching. A trial was finally real, and what happened inside that cell is next. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. No theories, no sensationalism, just what official investigations, court records, and verified journalism documented, including what comes next, which is the most disturbing chapter of all: the death and what it cost. August 10, 2019, 6:30 in the morning. Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He was transported to New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital. He was pronounced dead. The New York City medical examiner conducted an autopsy and ruled the cause of death suicide by hanging. That ruling stands as the official determination. What followed was a DOJ office of the Inspector General investigation into the circumstances surrounding his death. What that investigation documented was not a conspiracy. It was something in some ways more troubling, a cascade of institutional failure so complete, so layered, so inexplicably total that it requires being stated precisely and without embellishment. In late July 2019, roughly 2 weeks before his death, Epstein had experienced a prior incident in his cell. It was serious enough that the Bureau of Prisons placed him on suicide watch. 6 days after being placed on that watch, a psychiatrist cleared him to be moved from suicide watch to the Special Housing Unit. BOP policy for the Special Housing Unit was explicit on 2 points. Inmates required welfare checks every 30 minutes, and inmates in that unit required a cellmate. A man who had been on suicide watch 3 weeks earlier, the most high-profile federal prisoner in the country. The defendant at the center of a case with implications connections reaching into the highest levels of American, British, and European society. On the night of August 9th, the night before his death, Epstein's cellmate was transferred out of the unit. No replacement was assigned. He spent his final night alone in a cell that Bureau of Prisons policy required to be double occupied. The two officers responsible for monitoring Epstein that night were Tova Noel and Michael Thomas. Their required duty was unambiguous: visual welfare checks every 30 minutes throughout the shift. The Inspector General's investigation established that neither officer performed a single required check during a period of approximately 3 hours. What were they doing during those hours? Officer Noel browsed furniture websites. Both officers slept for extended, documented portions of their shift. And then, when their shift ended and the body was discovered, both officers falsified the official log sheets. They recorded welfare checks as having been performed, checks that the investigation confirmed never happened. Both were charged with making false records and lying to federal investigators. Charges were eventually dropped after both agreed to cooperate with the ongoing investigation, complete community service, and permanently leave the Bureau of Prisons. The camera positioned outside Epstein's cell malfunctioned that night. It did not capture footage of the relevant period. Footage from elsewhere in the facility, cameras covering other areas of the corridor, was reviewed by investigators. That footage showed no one entering the tier during the relevant period. DOE Inspector General Michael Horowitz concluded explicitly suicide. No physical evidence of third-party involvement. Individual misconduct by Noel and Thomas. Systemic management breakdown throughout the facility. That is the official record. What died with Jeffrey Epstein on August 10, 2019, beyond the man himself, was not replaceable by any subsequent legal proceeding. No trial, no subpoenaed financial records entered into public evidence, no compelled testimony under oath, no cross-examination. The one legal proceeding with the power to force every unanswered question into a courtroom and onto the public record. The proceeding that would have named names, followed money, and required every person with knowledge of this network to account for it under penalty of perjury, was gone. The most consequential evidence destroyed in modern American legal history was not a document. It was not a hard drive. It was not a file in a drawer. It was a trial that never happened. The files, the money, the unfinished story without a trial. Accountability built through other channels. Slower, less complete, less satisfying to anyone who had waited decades for it. But real, what people refer to as the Epstein files, is not a single document. It is a body of material assembled across multiple jurisdictions, spanning years: court records, depositions, flight logs, personal contact books, financial filings, civil litigation records. As individual courts ordered documents unsealed, names surfaced: politicians, executives, academics, entertainers, royalty. One distinction: any honest account of this case must maintain without compromise. A name appearing in an address book, a flight log, or a deposition establishes a documented connection to Epstein or his network. It does not, by itself, establish criminal conduct. These are materially different things. People who flew on his plane, attended his events, or appear in his contact records include individuals later charged with crimes and individuals against whom no allegation of misconduct has ever been made. The record documents presence. It does not automatically document participation. What the financial record established was something else entirely, and it is among the most significant findings to emerge from the entire case. JPM Morgan Chase maintained a banking relationship with Jeffrey Epstein from 1998 to 2013. That is 15 years. The relationship continued for 5 full years after his 2008 offender conviction. Internal communications reviewed during litigation showed documented concerns raised inside the bank about the nature of transactions in Epstein's accounts, concerns that were not acted on decisively. In June 2023, JP Morgan Chase agreed to pay $290 million to settle survivor claims that the bank had facilitated trafficking by continuing to process suspicious transactions. 3 months later, JP Morgan paid paid a separate $75 million to the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands over Epstein's activities on Little St. James by Deutsche Bank, which accepted Epstein as a client after J.P. Morgan severed ties, bringing him in despite his publicly documented criminal record, agreed in May 2023 to pay $75 million to settle survivor claims. 3 settlements. 2 of the world's largest financial institutions, over $440 million total, paid to survivors and their governments by institutions that continued servicing a convicted offender for years, in one case over a decade, despite documented internal awareness that something was wrong. Separately, the Epstein Victims Compensation Program was established to provide direct financial restitution outside the court system. More than 100 survivors received compensation. Total payouts exceeded $121 million. In January 2024, documents from Virginia Jeffrey's civil lawsuits were unsealed by federal court order. Dozens of names appeared in the disclosed material. Each document carries its own legal context that the existence of the name alone cannot resolve. Investigations in multiple jurisdictions remain ongoing. Whether any individual beyond Ghislaine Maxwell will face criminal prosecution remains formally and publicly unresolved. That is precisely why this case refuses to close. Here is what the record contains. A 53-page federal indictment shelved a secret non-prosecution agreement that a federal judge later ruled a violation of law, signed 13 months of a county jail sentence with 16 hours of freedom per Dalton Y. served. A convicted offender elevated by political appointment to the cabinet of the President of the United States, confirmed. A journalist who spent over a year doing what the justice system had declined to do for a decade, published. A second prosecution brought by an independent federal office ended by a death inside a cell. That bot policy required to be double occupied, monitored every 30 minutes by officers who instead slept and then falsified the logs. 2 major financial institutions that banked a convicted trafficker across decades, settling for over $440 million. 1 conviction. Ghislaine Maxwell, 20 years. The women, the survivors who reported, who cooperated with investigators, who litigated for years in civil court, who gave depositions and sat through the reconstruction of things they had tried to move past, who spoke to Julie K. Brown when no one in power was listening, who appeared at Maxwell's trial and made the jury understand what had been done to them. Every settlement checked, every sealed document forced open, every conviction. None of it exists without their persistence across 2 full decades against a system that cut them out of their own cases and told them to accept it. The conspiracy theories about this case are loud, and they are everywhere. The documented institutional failures are quieter. They do not require secret coordination to explain. They require only the ordinary, familiar operation of power protecting itself through private deal making, through work release arrangements for convicted offenders, through falsified log sheets, through financial institutions that chose profit over judgment, and through a 53-page indictment that simply stayed in a drawer. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is serving 20 years in federal prison. Banks have paid more than $440 million. Over 100 survivors receive compensation. The case, in its formal legal sense, has produced results. Who exactly knew? Who exactly enabled it? Who was shielded by what and why? And what that cost the girls? Who needed the system to work? That remains publicly unresolved. That is not a theory. That is the documented status of this case. Some stories disappear when attention moves on. This one has not earned that.